Afternoon, everyone. Welcome to In Conversation with Joe Gottdenker. We're so glad that you joined us today. Whether you're a regular or you're new to the program, thank you for coming today. My name is Elise Mathalon, and I'm the programs lead at Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center. And for this session, feel free to keep your videos on. Your mics are muted, so we don't have any accidental interruptions. And we're recording the program and we'll post it on our YouTube channel afterwards. And if you have any questions for Joe, please write them in the chat box and we'll do our best to get to them. And I'm proud today to be joined by Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center's senior educator, Elena Kingsbury, who will be interviewing Joe today. So Elena, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Elise. And thank you, Joe. Welcome to the program. It's an honor having you here today to share your personal story, as well as your wisdom as a leader in Holocaust education with many different organizations in Toronto here over the past 20 years. So before we begin our discussion, I'm just going to provide our audience with a few brief details about your background. Okay, so Joe was born in Sandomierz, Poland in the summer of 1942. Shortly before his birth, his mother was forced to give him up to a Polish family, the Yilos family, and she joined the underground partisans. Joe's father, meanwhile, had been arrested and enslaved in a forced labor camp actually prior to his birth. Joe lived with the Yilos family on their farm for over 3 years, posing as a Catholic relative from out of town. Miraculously, after liberation, Joe was reunited with his father, mother, 2 uncles, and an aunt. Joe and his family immigrated to the United States in 1948 and then to Canada in 1958. In Canada, Joe finished his high school studies and then graduated from the University of Western Ontario. Following that, he worked as a teacher, an entrepreneur, a real estate developer, and importantly, he has served as the vice chair of the Canadian Society for Yad Vashem and has also volunteered with FSWC and many other Jewish organizations. He has made it his life's mission to support Holocaust education and commemoration. Thank you so much, Joe. So maybe we'll just jump right into our questions. And I know that, you may not have direct memories from your time, your family's time prior to the Holocaust, but what do you know of what life was like for your family in Poland before the war began? For example, when did your parents marry? And do you know if they ever experienced anti-Semitism in their community prior to the war?
My parents married in 1937, and I was born in Sandomierz, but they were from Mielec, which was about 60 kilometers south of Sandomierz. And Mielec wasn't a shtetl, but it wasn't a big town either, so something in between. And they experienced anti-Semitism because that was part of the life in a Polish shtetl. And they didn't speak too much about it, but I know that on occasion in conversation with them, they would mention things that related to anti-Semitism.
Okay, thank you. And so moving into, during the war, I guess your father had already been arrested at this point when you were placed with and I'm so sorry, I know I'm mispronouncing their name. Could you maybe share it with us, the Polish family that rescued you?
I have a tough time with that sometimes too. Zholow's.
Thank you.
And
so what do you think motivated them to take you in and to help your parents?
That's a question that gets asked quite often, and the best answer I have is what the answer their granddaughter, Betty, who now lives in Chicago, who was in Canada for excuse me, Yad Vashem Holocaust memorial, at which time her grandparents were installed in the Righteous Among the Nations. And a reporter from the Ottawa Citizen asked her, and all she could answer was they were that kind of people. It's hard to answer that. I mean, they were devout Catholics, which I guess the religious part of it came into picture there, but it was basically, they were those kind of, they were, during the war, there were the perpetrators, there were the bystanders, and there were people like the Jolos, which were the righteous among the nation.
Mm. Thank you. And I think that's such an important reminder about, the choices that people make in these moments, and certainly, the kinds of people that step up and are willing to help others, because they also, not only did they take you in as a baby or an infant, they also took your mother in for a time, right?
Yes, my mother, we went from Sandomierz, where I was born, to the farm, and shortly thereafter, my mother recognized a classmate from the university. She went to the university, the Jagiellonian University in Krakow, and she thought she might be recognized and given up, so she thought it would be better to leave. She left me with them, and she went with the Polish underground.
Wow. And you said as well at one point, at least, that they helped to get your mother fake identity papers so that she was able to conceal the fact that she was Jewish, at least to an extent.
Yes, my mother was blonde, blue-eyed, and so she could pass for a Gentile. So they got the phony papers for her, which uh, she used, I guess, up to the time of my birth, and then she went with the underground. She really didn't need them at that point. But
Mm.
uh, as you know, the Germans invaded Poland in 1939. So from 39 to 42, she had a pass as a Gentile.
Right. Okay. A very useful set of documents to have, I'm sure, in that time. And so while she was with the partisans, you were with this family. And I know you probably don't have a lot of direct memories from that time, but what do you know about how you survived during that time? How long were you in hiding? And do you know anything about how you were treated, or what was your role within the family?
I was a long lost relative from somewhere else, uh, and I was treated as one of. They had a son. His name was Tadeusz. That's Betty's father, and he was like my brother. And it was uh, it was important to keep me under the radar, because I remember at one time things got a little bit dicey there, and I was going to be sent off to some relatives in another town. And just before I was going, they got word that their neighbors were hiding a Jewish person, and their neighbors, the person they were hiding, and the entire family was shot right in their front yard. Because during the war, Poland was the only country where harboring Jews was a capital offense, with summary execution. So that's why I stayed with the Jolos, and thankfully, no one gave us up, even though I've been back. And in one occasion that I was back, we were talking to a neighbor, uh, very old, obviously it was very old, and she looked at me and she said, "I knew they were hiding a Jew there." So,
Wow.
but we weren't giving up.
Wow. Well, she was probably pretty young herself at
Yes.
the time, but and that is, such a reminder that even how many decades later, those, that search for the Jews, and where were Jews hiding, that was such an obsession for a lot of people. So I'm really glad you weren't discovered during that time. And but it is, I think, also important, clearly you had a very close relationship with the family, even in the aftermath of the war. So that's, I think, something that's really special as well. I don't know if all of the hidden children that I've spoken with have, been able to maintain that relationship. So did you primarily learn about your experiences by speaking with the Yola family and by talking with your parents? Because I would imagine you don't have a lot of direct memories, or am I wrong?
No, you're right. I don't have many direct memories, and some of the memories that I have could actually be things that I was told and, absorbed, but not as my own memory. But I tried to learn as much about the family as possible. I'm still in touch with their granddaughter who lives in Chicago, and we have a very close relationship. I go to all their family functions and weddings. Can't say bar mitzvahs because they're Catholic, but communions and weddings, and it's very nice to maintain that relationship.
It is. It's beautiful, honestly. Um, okay, so maybe I'll ask next about how you were reunited. So you were with the family for around 3 years, is that correct? And then when were you reunited with your mother and father?
It was a two-step process. I was reunited with my mother after the Russian liberation of Poland, and then she came out from the underground and went back to Sandomierz, and I was reunited with her then. And then I was reunited with my father, who was with my two uncles in a concentration camp in Bavaria. And when they were liberated by the Americans, my uncle David went back to Poland, found out that I was alive and that his sister was alive, and he went back to Poland at great danger to himself because the Iron Curtain was coming down and travel between was very, very restricted. He got my mother and I and went back to Poland, where we reunited with my dad and another uncle and an aunt, who were the only survivors of a very large family.
Wow. And I would imagine it was very different from your perspective as a young child, but what do you think life was like for you and for your family in the immediate aftermath of the war? Challenges and, just in terms of even, where to live and how to support the family and things like that?
We were considered DPs, which stands for displaced persons. And we were fortunate in that my uncle Dave, who spoke English, was got a job with UNRWA, United Nations Relief Organization, and he helped coordinate the relief for the displaced people. And because of that, he had certain perks, which made our life in Germany much better. I went to a parochial school taught by a priest, and among the German Bavarian, like Catholicism kind of followed me around. As a matter of fact, I'm married to a Catholic woman now, so it's the full circle. And I had I had a very normal upbringing, other than
Yeah.
I had friends and very, I don't recall any anti-Semitism in Bavaria during those times.
And that is, I think, also that brings me to a question that I meant to ask you earlier. I would assume during the war, you probably weren't told you were Jewish, or it wasn't something that was discussed openly. And so, do you remember as a young child having a sense of a Jewish identity, or being aware that you were Jewish and not Catholic, or is that something that developed as you got older, or how was that?
Well, I have to hand it to my parents. They were pretty good about weaning me from Catholicism, because after I left the Jolos, I
Yeah.
still prayed to Jesus at night. And whenever we went past a church or cathedral, I asked to go in. And so they didn't shock me with the fact that, that was the situation. But slowly, I would say it really didn't happen until we got to the US. Like in Germany, there wasn't very much of a change from Catholicism to Judaism.
Right. Right. Okay. Thank you for sharing. And I think I think that's something that a lot of the children that I've spoken to, that, hidden children in the Holocaust, a lot of the time, their Jewish identity is something that they may have discovered later in life, or, there's a lot of different journeys that people have taken kind of towards their spirituality.
part of the learning process was somewhat traumatic. I was not circumcised when I was born because being circumcised was like a death sentence in Poland at that
Right.
time. And because of all the traveling and everything else, I only had my circumcision just before my bar mitzvah when I was 12 years old.
Oh,
So, yeah,
that must have been very difficult. I know it can be very painful.
it
That's
it completed the circle of my Judaism, though.
okay. Well, fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. And so this brings me to, I guess, this might have been around that same age or a little bit later. So your family immigrated first, so from Germany to the United States. When did that happen?
That happened in 1948. We we had lived in Germany for 3 years, and my mother primarily was wanting to leave Germany. I mean, it wasn't, considering what happened during the war, wasn't the ideal place to be living. But we tried to get into the U.S., but couldn't get into the quota. So we were supposed to go to Ecuador. And then 3 weeks before the boat sailed from Hamburg, we got onto the US quota and we went to the US. If that didn't happen, I'd be speaking Spanish now.
Wow, it would have been a different journey for sure. That's fascinating. And so you were about 6 years old at the time?
Yes.
Okay, great. And so you moved to the United States, and then when did you arrive in Canada, or what was the context of coming here to Canada?
We came to Canada in 1958. We lived in the US for 10 years. I'm a dual citizen, US and Canadian. And we came in 1958. My dad was working with my uncle, who married a Torontonian lady whose family was in the building business. And he would come up in the summers and work here because there was no winter construction in those days. And I guess he got tired of the commute between Washington and Toronto. So in March of 1958, I was informed they were moving to Canada.
And how did you feel about that? That must have been a
It
difficult
was
age to be moving.
was difficult. I mean, I was just turning 16. I was just started high school in the US. I was in grade 10. And to move, not only across the street or different part of the city to another country, uh, took a little getting used to.
Or understandable. Okay. And do you remember when you arrived in Canada, what your impression was like, or what was your experience like when you entered school here?
Well, I went from a inner city high school in a well, I would say predominantly, totally non-Jewish neighborhood where we lived, to Bathurst Manor, and that was quite a jump. And the school I went to in Toronto was Northview, which had just been built, and it was like a showcase school. So it was a very interesting change, and it was I guess about 85% Jewish. I remember Northview, they shut down during Jewish holidays. There wasn't any
Um,
point being open, so it was quite a change, but a good change.
good, good. And from there, you went on to Western University.
Yes,
Okay. And what did you study in university?
I studied business administration.
Ah, fantastic. All right. So just to return to the Holocaust a little bit and how it impacted your family dynamic. I just wanted to, as someone who speaks publicly about the Holocaust, I'm always curious about whether that was a subject that you were able to speak about within your own family. So was that a taboo subject with your parents? Was that something you even had an interest in talking about with them when you were a young person?
My my parents didn't speak about it at all, and so I gleaned very little from them. But I did from my uncle Dave, who didn't stop talking about it, and I guess it. I was trying to assimilate. Like I'm an only child, uh, and I tried to assimilate into the Canadian culture. And at times, I was actually I'm ashamed to say it, I was kind of embarrassed because my parents spoke with an accent, and half the time they spoke either Polish or Yiddish or German, but English was definitely not, it was more like their fourth language, not even their second language. But then later on, I came to understand that my background was a positive thing, not a negative thing.
Fantastic. And I think that is something that I definitely, at least I know with my own family, and that's, often it's very difficult for parents to speak with their children and, for those conversations. And I think for children as well, when you're forming your own identity, it's, maybe, yeah, it's harder to seek out those answers. So this, I think, brings me very naturally to the question of when did you first start, being involved in Holocaust education and actually speaking about your own experiences?
It was a multi-step process, I would say, because around the mid 80s, around 1985, I got involved with Baycrest. And there were a lot of Holocaust survivors as residents and clients of Baycrest that I got to know and experience. And from there, I went to other Jewish organizations like UJA, Simon Wiesenthal, Yad Vashem. I'm also involved with the Poland Museum in Warsaw. So it was a multifaceted transformation, I would say.
Okay. And so that's something that I think is also very interesting. Your work with Yad Vashem as well as different organizations. But maybe we can talk for a moment just about the fact. So it was in 2010 that the Yola family was recognized as righteous among the nations. So could you maybe talk a little bit about what that experience was like, and what does it even mean to be righteous among the nations for some of our audience members?
Righteous among the nations is a designation to people who, without any rewards, financial or otherwise, and to the risk of themselves, saved Jews during the war. I guess the most famous one would be Raoul Wallenberg, and they're enshrined at Yad Vashem. There was an area where there was a tree planted for each member, but there were so many, I think around 20,000 now, that they ran out of trees. So they're just plaques there. And it was very moving because they were installed in Ottawa during a Holocaust Memorial Day, and which was attended by the Prime Minister and a lot of dignitaries. And I brought the whole family up from Chicago, Betty, her husband, the kids, and they were all there when their either great grandparents or grandparents, whoever we're talking about, were recognized. And Betty was given the medal that's given to righteous among the nation or their descendants. And then there was a very moving, a very, very nice occasion.
Absolutely. I mean, I can only imagine, but I think that it's so important to honor righteous among the nations and to take those opportunities to celebrate the rescuers. And maybe that's I think a question. Why do you think, in the broader sort of scope of learning about the Holocaust, why is it important to talk about righteous among the nations figures?
Well, in a very dark time in our history, they were the bright light. That's the way I can describe it. And when I speak about that. When I speak to schools and other organizations, I start by saying, if you've ever spoken to Holocaust survivors before, you've probably heard all the horrific things. And now I'm going to tell you, a bright light during that time. And this resonates with the people I speak to quite a lot, especially the kids, younger people.
Absolutely. And I think, especially as you say, a lot of the time people focus on the darker aspects, or even troublingly, we find a lot of students, they know more about Adolf Hitler than they do about any righteous among the nations figures or people who, demonstrated positive leadership. So I think that that is such an important part of Holocaust education. So maybe, and this is a more sort of broad question, but you are both a survivor and a Holocaust educator. So why do you think right now we need to be teaching students about the Holocaust? What are some of the key lessons that we can draw from that time of history?
Well, this is a very difficult time, and we talk about the Holocaust and anti-Semitism, but there's all kinds of injustices going in the world, religious ones, Islamophobia and so on. And when I speak, I try to bring this up in that I'm not focusing just on anti-Semitism, but I'm focusing on any injustices, any prejudices. And we're getting so polarized. I don't know where it's going to end. We all know what's going on south of the border, and who knows, and the horrific things that are happening in the Middle East. So this is why I find it's important to bring up, one good, and I wouldn't say good aspect, but one bright moment during that dark period, and maybe people can pick up from that and act on that premise as opposed to the prejudices.
Right. Absolutely. I think that is such a, empathy and the power of, of even ordinary people to take action in the darkest of times. These are really important lessons for students to be learning about right now. And as you say, the rescuers and the righteous among the nations, we can all learn a lot from their stories right now. And I think that that's one thing that regardless of what's going on in the world, that's something that people can embrace. So my last main question for you, and I do see we have some questions coming into the chat, so we'll move on to questions from the audience momentarily. But this last question is really about what makes you hopeful for the future. Let's focus on that question. So what does make you hopeful for the future, even though there's obviously plenty of challenges in the future as well?
That's a tough question. Considering what's going on now, it's a tough question in that you have to really dig deep to have that hope. And the only thing I can say is that there's more good in humanity than bad, and that's the only comfort I can take.
I do think that that's an important message, that, there is a lot of good in humanity, and, people, sometimes especially when we hear about some of the hate in the world and the nastiness, that there's a lot of, there's a lot of fear and there's a lot of anger, but that sometimes, those emotions can sometimes be worked through, and we can work towards positive action. So for our audience members, I want to open it up to all of you. If anyone has any questions for Joe, please feel free to jump in. I do already have one from Elizabeth. First of all, she says, great to see you. You can still speak Spanish, she said, but also, do you remember by any chance what your parents said about living in Bavaria? It was perhaps not the happiest country or territory to live in post-war.
Well, ironically, living in Bavaria was not that bad because this was the Americans that liberated that part of Germany, and there was a tremendous. I mean, there was a fear of being anti-Semitic or showing any anti-Semitism, considering what happened during the war. The occupying forces just didn't tolerate it. So if anyone did have any of those feelings, they kept them to themselves.
So there was sort of a feeling of, oppression in a way, or, that there was not space to express ideas, which was also a suppression of hateful ideas, which I think was necessary in that period.
Yeah, I think the best way to describe it is the Americans made sure that there was no anti-Semitism shown.
Right.
And
That brings me to another question. So you said that you didn't really experience anti-Semitism in Bavaria or in the post-war period. Have you experienced it subsequently, either living in Canada or as a young person in the United States?
yes, in the United States, definitely.
Mm.
I experienced a lot of anti-Semitism. And here in Canada, I haven't experienced too much directly, but I know that there's a under, sort of under the radar, but there is anti-Semitism, no question about it. I haven't experienced it directly, though.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. But that's something that I know that a lot of people in our community are very concerned about, but it's certainly also something that I think, we have a lot of power to stand against. And also there's a lot, as you say, I think we need to remember the good in humanity. And I do think, one of the things that I hear from you, a strength that we have here in Canada is diversity. And when there are so many different kinds of people, hopefully, it's always going to be a challenge to the kind of, supremacy of one race or one group over the other that we saw under Nazism. So while there might be tensions and conflict, there's also a lot of space for people to work together. And, especially I think when we have schools and educational institutions that bring young people of different backgrounds together, that can be really beneficial. Oh, I'm just from Peter Yassam, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that. Joe, I joined you in the trip to Poland 10 years ago, where we visited Sandomierz and the other village. And what was your impression from that trip, and have you returned since that time?
Uh, that trip was part of I have a cousin, my Uncle David's son, Daniel, who's a documentary filmmaker, and he was shooting a documentary, which is just about finished now, at that time that we went through with Peter, and Peter really helped us out with connecting us with a lot of the Polish organizations that gave my cousin a lot of information. And yes, Peter, I've been back. As a matter of fact, I went back one time on a motorcycle with 10 Israelis. We all rode into Sandomierz and then to Mielec, and it was a very interesting experience. And if anybody wants to watch it, it's on YouTube. It was called Back to Berlin. It was a documentary film made on that trip.
Check that out. Back to Berlin. Wonderful. Okay, and another question from Jude Allen. How do you deal with crowds that might have sort of an anti-Israel attitude, or when we might see anti-Semitism in the form of anti-Zionism? Have you had to deal with that in front of audiences?
No, I haven't. Fortunately,
Oh,
I
good.
haven't.
Okay.
I don't know what I would do, how I would react, but I haven't. Fortunately, as I said, I haven't experienced it. I know it exists, but I haven't experienced it.
Right. Well, I'm glad that hasn't been something you've had to address. But it is, certainly I think it's a question that I understand coming through, as we have seen that quite a bit in our own programming. But yes, thank you so much for the question. And so, another great question. So when you came to Canada, did you feel at all confused about religion, or is that something that by your arrival in Canada you felt pretty confident or support, a sense of your Jewishness was sort of established, or was that something that you were still working through?
Well, that's a good question. It was quite a transition. As I said, I came from an inner city Washington school, and where we lived, I lived predominantly in a Negro neighborhood, and coming to Canada to Bathurst Manor. If anybody is aware what Bathurst Manor is like, that was a great transition, and that's, I think, where my Judaism started coming out more, because I was in amongst my people.
Definitely. I think that's something that definitely, makes a huge difference when you have that sense of community and can sort of be more immersed in that group experience. So we still have time if anyone else has other questions. But if not, then we can also, Joe, did you have any other thoughts that you wanted to share with the audience today? Or what is important to you about speaking with audiences like the one we have right now?
It's part of the education process. I usually speak with the audiences that are predominantly not Jewish,
Mm.
the schools and the organizations that I speak to. And that's a form of, I guess, educating and getting people aware of what intolerance can lead to. But I don't usually speak to Jewish organizations.
Well, I think the analogy another speaker we talked with earlier said it's kind of like preaching to the converted, which may not feel as necessary in a way, but I think it's such an invaluable experience for everybody here to hear what you have to say. I do have another couple of comments that have come in, so I just wanted to ask those questions as well. So from Israel Maida, Joe, what does it mean to be one of the youngest survivors? So you will hopefully live to be one of the longest surviving persons to experience the Holocaust, but to be one of the youngest.
Thanks for that comment, Israel. I don't look at it that way. I guess sometimes I actually don't feel like I am a survivor, because of the true survivors, like people like we know, Israel, like Pinchas Guter and Max Eisen, blessed be his memory, and those people, they survived all the horrific things. I was kind of sheltered, but I've been told by professional people, psychiatrists, psychologists, that actually I am a survivor. And that is why I try to do as much as I can to educate. And one of my most satisfying things is that, I think it's called March of Remembrance and Hope, which is part of March of uh, uh, having a Biden
The
moment.
living, March of the Living.
March of, thank you, March of the Living, which Ellie Rubenstein organizes. And that is very rewarding, because we go to Europe, we go to Germany to see how Nazism rose, and we go to Poland and go through the camps, and predominantly almost 100% non-Jewish young adults. And the transformation is incredible. And I still keep in touch with a lot of them, and they're probably the best ambassadors for anti-Semitism and education that there could be, because they are true converts.
Wow. That's I think such an incredible gift that you've given them by accompanying them and being a part of their education. We also have a comment from your granddaughter Lily. Great job, Papa Joe. So that's always nice. And so one question that I don't know if it's a difficult question, but I think a great question, Grace. Thank you. One question that she has is, how do we help non-Jews as non-educators? How can we speak to people to help, maybe help them understand our perspective?
That's a tough question. Can you repeat that slowly?
Yes, I'll try. So yes. So how can we get non-Jewish people to to understand our perspective as non-educators? So I think just, for everyday people who may not have a teacher's background, how can they speak to non-Jewish people?
The It's a tough one.
Any great tips? Yeah, I know
Um,
that's a tough one.
just to every opportunity one gets to engage with non-Jewish people and explain to them, answer questions, deal with misconceptions that they may have, and sort of guide them in the right direction. And this is like the March of Remembrance and Hope is a fantastic thing, because these people, young adults, come back and they just spread it.
Absolutely. No, I think that's an excellent answer. And I think that's a good place for us to end our conversation today. So I just wanted to say thank you so much, Joe. I know it can be difficult, and especially when yeah, we are going through difficult times in the world. There's a lot to to be hopeful for in the future. There's a lot of challenges for us to deal with, but I also think that, by learning about the Holocaust from, from people who lived through it like yourself, we can only be more prepared to deal with the challenges of today. Um, and yes, just some thank yous coming into the chat. Everybody is extremely grateful for your voice here today. So thank you.
I thank them.
Good. All right. Well, everybody, we wish you a wonderful afternoon, and we hope to see you for our next program. Take care.
Thank you.